afternoon, everyone, and welcome, a hearty welcome to IMERIT's very first event for the 2010-2011 academic year, and there are lots more to come, so keep your eyes peeled. Let me give you a little background on what IMERIT is. Some of you might not know, some of you have a fuzzy idea. IMERIT stands for, and I'm going to read this so I don't get it wrong, although I know it, International and Multicultural Education, Research, Innovation, and Training. IMERIT is, in essence, it's the institutional entity that helps us realize our international and multicultural mission. And it's a system-wide entity, it's a system-wide initiative, and it's kind of pulled together by faculty-driven IMERIT initiatives, San Diego being one. Let's talk a little bit about why we're here today. We're going to talk about immigration. The topic is immigration. And this issue has come into focus as a result, as we know, of the controversial Arizona immigration law. And what that did, it served to spark interest and debate, not only nationally, but internationally, about not only but immigration issues, all the issues that surround immigration. It has essentially served to mobilize a lot of opinions on one side or the other. Some people who were neutral about immigration from the get-go have found themselves taking specific stance on immigration, undocumented and documented immigration. This is an issue that is laden with psychological and cultural implications. We know that. And for no other reason but this reason, it is really salient to us at Alliant. After all, we're at Alliant International University. We find a significant number of us could identify with being immigrant. One of your identities is an immigrant identity, being current or couple generations removed. I am one. And I can select by show of hands, how many of us identify ourselves as immigrants? See what I'm talking about? This is us. This is part of who we are. It really is. So it is really important that we put some emphasis, we, Alliant International University, on immigration and its implications, because it has ramifications for our institutional culture and also the teaching and learning that occurs within our institution. So it should be front and center. So that's why today we decided to take the first step in bringing it front and center. We have put together a dynamic group of experts who will lead us, who will present, and then lead us in discussion about issues. A little bit about the group. We have 4 of our homegrown faculty experts, and I'll introduce you to them after. And they're joined by a student who's going to give us some insight into his personal experience. And then we are very honored to have with us Tang, who is an attorney for the ACLU, and her expertise, one of her expertise is in immigration. So she's going to give us some facts, insight into immigration in the United States and California. But before I do that, let me introduce our esteemed Provost, Dr. Russ Newman, also an attorney, who is going to give us some welcoming remarks and help us kick off this event. Right? Thanks, Wendy.
And psychology. Not necessarily in that order. I just want to do a quick welcome. Some of you I haven't seen since you started back again this semester, so welcome back to school. Welcome to this event. Thank you for turning out. I also want to thank the IMERIT San Diego group for putting this together. This is a real good opportunity to do some of what is a part of the mission of this university. And Wendy's already started to talk about the issues surrounding immigration and how that has become such a significant issue since it really hit the papers, the media, the streets over the last year. We as a university have been thinking about how do we participate in this? What is our role? What should the university be doing in order to take on these sorts of issues? And there's a couple of parts of our mission that I think make the university very well situated for this kind of discussion today to try to get a greater understanding, to really look at the set of issues that revolve around integration. One of them is, and it may be lesser known to all of you, community engagement. This university really does see itself as training professionals to be able to solve real-world problems out in the community where they live and work. Community might be a neighborhood, but it also might be larger society. It might be the entire country. And in this regard, here's a real-world significant problem that our society, our community is grappling with, immigration. And we have some expertise that can be brought to bear on that debate, that issue, that ability to create some policy, to create some laws. So that's a part of a mission I think is very important for the university. But also the one that probably is much clearer is we have a long legacy here of being involved in multicultural and diversity agendas and issues, and this very much is one of those issues. But even more than that, the IMERIT that Dr. Chung talked to you about is the beginning integration of international and multicultural, domestic multicultural issues on the one hand, beginning to integrate with international issues. Now, I've seen in many different places where those things are dealt with separately. People think about domestic, multicultural issues, cultural competence that goes on within a country. People, on the other hand, think about those issues that are out there overseas, international, in other countries. But this university is beginning to do something, I think, that goes beyond that. It's putting those together. What are the implications of integrating domestic multicultural approaches and thinking with those cultural values, attitudes that come from a more international perspective? The implications may be very different. The synergies may be very different. Immigration is one of those issues that starts to really get to the heart of that integration. Those of you who have followed the history of integration, immigration may know about some of the early writings in the 1900s on the melting pot. And when people come to this country, are they enculturated or are they acculturated? And I'm not going to go any farther with that as other than an example of the kind of questions when these issues from domestic cultures, national cultures come together with international cultures, because I'm not an expert in that, and I'm starting to get outside of my scope. So I, again, want to thank you all for coming. Thank IMERIT for putting on this opportunity, and turn it over to the experts who really will be able to take a look at this and bring the kind of expertise I think this university is really stellar at bringing to bear on real-world community problems that we need to try to contribute to. So thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you very much. Well, that's our kickoff. Now let's turn it over to the experts, as Russ said. Let's begin with our esteemed, our honored guest today. Her name is Stephanie Tang, and you want to come forward? This is Stephanie. She is a legal fellow, staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union, this is the ACLU, of San Diego and Imperial County. She works with the ACLU's legal and policy team on a variety of issues, including immigrants' rights, the death penalty, and education. She recently represented a transgendered individual from Mexico in immigration court. Very interesting. Stephanie received a BA from Yale University and a JD from Yale Law School. So let's give her a hearty Alliant.
Well, thanks very much for having me here. I'm just going to give a basic overview of immigration law, which is a very broad and complex field, so these are going to be very general basics. So how can an immigrant become a legal permanent resident? Well, there's 4 major ways to immigrate legally and permanently into the United States. One of them is family-based immigration, which constitutes about 75% of regular immigration to the United States. This is where a family member who is a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, or LPR, sponsors certain family members to come to the U.S. The United States government puts a cap on how many residents, how many visas can be given to relatives. So each year there's a numerical cap, which means a lot of times there's long waiting lines if you're a certain family member. The second type is employment demand-based immigration. This means employers usually sponsor workers to come to the U.S., and these are usually for high-skilled professions. So we're talking about researchers, executives, professors, or other professionals with advanced degrees. Only 5,000 visas are given per year for unskilled workers, which is much lower than the demand, both for people trying to enter and for employers seeking less skilled workers. A third type of immigration is humanitarian-based immigration. You may have heard of people who are seeking asylum or withholding of removal. These are people who are fleeing their home country because they fear persecution for one reason or another. And there's also a limited number of people who are granted asylum from each region of the world. There are some other less common ways to be granted a visa. One way is a diversity visa, which is basically just a straight lottery for people who are coming from countries that send relatively few immigrants to the U.S. And another example would be someone who's granted temporary protected status, which means that their country is in crisis, whether through war, natural disaster, or some other event. The U.S. government basically takes them in. And all immigrants have to go through an extensive background check. So this includes family history, your identification, employment, residence history, and a screening for any criminal activity. So what is an unauthorized immigrant? Well, this is someone who is present in the U.S. without the permission of the American government. This can happen if someone enters without being inspected by an immigration official, or they entered by using false documents, or it can be someone who entered legally and then they just overstayed their visa, for example, on a tourist visa or a student visa. And it can be very difficult for undocumented or unauthorized immigrants to become legal. You can't just get in line because you have to fit in one of these four major categories that I just described. People might not have the required family ties, or they might not have the job they need, or they might not qualify for asylum to get one of these visas. And even if they do fit into one of these categories, because of the limitations on the number of visas issued every year, there's very long waiting lines. So this is one of the problems with the immigration system. The restrictions on the legalization process mean that there are long waiting lines for family members and employment-based immigration. Family members might wait years before they're reunited. Employers often need more workers, especially less skilled workers, than the current immigration limits allow. And some employers take advantage of unauthorized workers because the workers are afraid to go to the authorities if they know that they're undocumented and might be turned over to immigration officials. So employers might not pay undocumented immigrants. They might provide poor working conditions. And this really makes it hard for all employers to make a profit and lowers the standards for all workers in the U.S. Another problem with the current immigration system is the use of enforcement strategy. So this means to respond to unauthorized immigration, the government has been increasing border enforcement. This hasn't actually reduced the number of unauthorized immigrants in the United States. It just means there's more enforcement at the border. Another part of the enforcement strategy is that sometimes the federal government will team up with state and local governments to enforce federal immigration law. Now this is problematic because, as I mentioned, immigration law is extremely complex. Immigration lawyers get messed up all the time. So local officials often don't know the law and they may apply it wrong. It basically invites them to engage in racial profiling in certain cases. One example is SB 1070, which is the Arizona law that we just mentioned. This law basically tried to put enforcement of federal immigration law in the hands of state and local police. It expanded local authority to stop, question, and detain immigrants for violating federal immigration law. And the problem with this is that it hurts public trust in law enforcement. So if you're an undocumented immigrant and you're the victim of a crime, you might be afraid to go to the authorities because you don't want to get deported. And this really hurts not just undocumented immigrants, but everyone, because if victims of a crime aren't reporting, then people who perpetrate the crimes, often go unpunished. So the law is currently being challenged by several lawsuits in court, including one with the ACLU. And basically the arguments are that it interferes with federal law, it invites racial profiling, and there's a host of other unconstitutional and potential unconstitutional issues with it. So what can we do about these problems? There's something called Comprehensive Immigration Reform, or CIR, which is basically what it sounds like, attempts to reform the immigration system as a whole. The goal of this is to provide a way for the 10 to 11 million undocumented immigrants to earn legal status, to integrate them and not punish them. If you focus the border enforcement on the real national security risks, such as drug trafficking, border violence, and not just on preventing illegal border crossings, it'll better address our national needs. Also, the federal government and not state and local governments should be the ones enforcing immigration laws. And through all of this, CIR emphasizes that we should be protecting human and civil rights. Finally, there's the enforcement of labor laws. Now, labor laws have to do with immigration because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of employers may try to be unscrupulous and hire workers and not pay them because they know they're afraid to go to the authorities to report these violations. So the idea behind enforcing immigration laws or labor laws is that unscrupulous employers who don't provide safe working conditions or the correct wages shouldn't be allowed to profit just because they're treating unauthorized workers poorly. And finally, there's the DREAM Act. You may have heard about the DREAM Act. It stands for Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors. And the goal of this act is to help immigrant children obtain education and get legal status. So under the DREAM Act, if a student meets certain requirements and completes at least 2 years of college or military service, then they can get legal permanent residence. And states can also choose to grant in-state tuition to all resident students, regardless of their immigration status under the DREAM Act. This is sort of an extension of a Supreme Court case called Plyler versus Doe, which says that states have to allow undocumented children the same access to free public education as all other children, basically saying, children of immigrants don't really have a choice as to what their parents did, so they should have an equal opportunity as other children to obtain education and become legal residents. So the DREAM Act basically just extends this to higher education. It extends the same concepts to higher education. So this is basically just an overview of the system. I know it's very general, but if you have any questions, I will be here afterwards. And also, I just wanted to let you guys know that we have some information about the ACLU, some Know Your Rights brochures, and if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and Jess over here will come around with some information, or if you want to sign up for our email list or anything. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, you said it was a general overview, but that gave us some kind of framework to really go through the things that we didn't really understand about the DREAM Act, which is pretty interesting. I think there are people who know about it but don't know the details. So thank you for that insight. Our next panelist, our next presenter, is our, as I said, homegrown faculty, one of our homegrown faculty experts in immigration. This is Dr. David Felsen, who is going to talk to us, give us an overview of some important immigrant issues. A little bit about David. David Felsen is an associate professor and program director of International Studies Program at the Marshall Goldsmith School of Management here at Alliant. He holds a doctorate in politics from Oxford University in the UK and an MA and BS degrees from McGill University in Montreal, Canada. He's an expert on Latin American and European politics and the politics of immigration. His recent publications include a book chapter entitled Italy, Toward a Balanced Immigration Policy, a co-edited volume entitled Immigration, a Documentary and Reference Guide, and is currently working on another book entitled Controversial Issues in American Politics, the Immigration Debate. So let's give a hearty Alliant welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to Stephanie for giving the overview, because I'm going to be giving the overview of the history to all of you. So I think this actually goes very well together, her initial discussion and my discussion afterwards. So I was asked to talk about who's in, who's out. I decided to look at a little bit of the history and then talk about some of the more recent history and the upsurge of discussion of immigration, particularly in the period between 2005-2007. So a lot of this would be familiar. Immigration, there's been cycles of immigration in U.S. history. In the 1780s and 90s, who was out? Well, foreigners, radicals who were from the French Revolution, British loyalists. There was concern about revolutionary or counter-revolutionary activity in the United States in the early years. The first naturalization law of 1790 included a 2-year residency. The second naturalization law in 95 included a residency that you had to be 5 years in order to become a naturalized American. The third Naturalization Act in 1798 required 15 years. So there was an increase in concern over those coming to the United States. This was the buildup of a cycle towards restrictive immigration policy. But by 1800, under the Jefferson administration, it was lowered again to 5 years. And currently, for most worker-based visas, there's a 5-year residency requirement. So that's pretty much the standard right now. That's one period in immigration history. Another is, we might outline, is the anti-Catholic sentiment in the 1800s. I wanted to identify that as a very crucial period. By 1840, well, the Irish potato famine of 1845 to 52 led a lot of Irish Catholics to come to the U.S. By 1860, there were 10% of the U.S. population of 3 million people. An Irish, anti-Irish, anti-Catholic, anti-foreigner sentiment movement grew. The Know-Nothings. How many of you know of the Know-Nothings? Or how many of you know nothing of the Know-Nothings? It was a semi-secret anti-foreigner, anti-Catholic movement that was rampant in the 1850s, and it was so successful at one point that it found political expression in the American Party, which won the gubernatorial race in Massachusetts in 1854 and swept the entire congressional delegation from Massachusetts. So it wasn't a... It was in the 1850s. By the Civil War, it had died out, and gradually Irish Catholics by the late 1800s were accepted in U.S. society, became part of the mainstream. So again, another cycle. So you can think about what's happening today and sort of what happened back in the mid-1800s. Anti-Chinese immigration sentiment, a very terrible period in U.S. history because we had a law passed. First, there was a poll tax imposed on Chinese workers. A lot of them were drawn to California, just like foreigners from all over the world, because of the gold rush. Anti-Chinese nativist groups like the Chinese Exclusion League began to insist on stopping Chinese immigrant labor. It made its way to Washington and to the legislation which we knew as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, passed by the U.S. Congress. It was renewed constantly and formally repealed only in the 1940s. Even though it gradually, it really wasn't implemented toward the early 1900s, but I mean, it's a very dark chapter in U.S. history. You know about the Great Wave of immigration. Between 1880 and 1920, 23 million immigrants came to the United States, primarily from South and Eastern Europe. They settled in the main cities such as New York, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, but also elsewhere all across the country. Many Americans today claimed connection to this great wave of immigration, in fact, a sizable amount. One of the responses to this great wave of immigration was a commission that was set up under Senator Dillingham. The recommendations of a 42-volume study were to change the policy in favor of good, old immigrants from Northern Europe. You'll see sort of the racial undertones here versus new immigrants from South and Eastern Europe. Recommendations based on racial preferences and quotas. So this cycle that we see today, in a way, has historical precedent. There were other groups that were out, and there are other groups who were in. The Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the Nationality Act of 1924 were based on Dillingham recommendations from that commission. Immigration quotas were based on race, religion, and ethnicity, and it led to World War I. It didn't lead to World War I. I was putting two sentences together. These quotas, imagine that the quotas would lead to World War I. That would be quite funny. By the way, German aggression led to World War I. World War I and the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand, for those who really want to know the details. The decline in immigration because of the war, World War I, as well as the subsequent maintaining of low levels after World War I, led to a very restrictive immigration policy in the 1920s and 1930s. One of the reasons I'm going very fast is I was told I had 15 minutes, so I'm probably going to go over, even though I'm speaking at this pace.
8, 10.
Really?
Yeah, more.
I have a few slides left, but I need to get to the contemporary bit. So hold up a card at 5 minutes, please. After the Second World War, the United States immigration policy became more open. Two pieces of legislation. One, the 1952 Immigration and Naturalization Act, which weakened the quota system by letting federal agencies overrule the quotas. And finally, the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act abolished the national origins quota formula of 1921 and 24, completely in its place a hemispheric and country quota. These quotas were established instead with a priority on family reunification visas and employment visas, and the previous presenter talked about that very nicely, because that's a system that's more or less in place today. By the 1980s, there was a lot of concern about undocumented workers, unauthorized workers. Depending on where you are in the debate, I don't want to use I'm trying to give a neutral presentation, but those who tend to be more sympathetic call them undocumented. Those who tend to be less sympathetic call them illegal. Unauthorized seems to be the most neutral term, which is why it was used by the previous presenter, and just so you should know that information. There was a growth of undocumented or unauthorized workers. Owing to the growth of by 1980 there were 3 million unauthorized workers in the U.S., mostly from Mexico. Notice that I moved back and forth between the language, and I think at one point I used illegal just for lack of consistency. There was a growing number of southwestern states here who were complaining about the growing burden on social services. President Reagan, under his guidance, Congress passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which brought into being the first comprehensive reform. On the one hand, it focused on enforcement, toughening the controls of the border. On the other hand, it offered a path to residency and citizenship for many of the unauthorized workers living in the country. By the 1990s, there was again an issue because by that time, over 10 million unauthorized workers were in the country. We know here in California there was Proposition 187 in 1994 that would have denied basic services to undocumented workers, thus overturning one of the rulings that was talked about in the previous discussion, or which was caused. What year was the ruling in? Oh, we'll go over that after. President, I don't mean for you to give my talk. President Clinton and Congress in 1996 attempted to address the concern of states, but also to preempt further states from taking actions like California. So they passed two laws. One is the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act to reduce their eligibility to social services, both documented, legal residents and unauthorized workers, as well as the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act, which enhanced border enforcement. The pattern continues, the idea that legislation addressed both enforcement and changes to immigration law. That's what it was meant by comprehensive reform. The immigration debate was very much alive under the Bush administration. I have 4 minutes left. In the 2000s, there were 11 million unauthorized workers in 2000. There was some interest in redoing the 1986 law in terms of offering a path to citizenship. After 9/11, national security and border enforcement became bigger priorities, obviously. The Patriot Act of 2001, the Homeland Security Act of 2002, reorganized immigration channels, and relations soured with Mexico. So for several years, immigration was a non-topic. But between 2004 and 2007, the White House, moderate Republicans and Democrats sought comprehensive immigration reform. Very quickly, Hagel and Daschle in 2004 proposed a reform which failed. McCain-Kennedy, the one which was called the Secure America Orderly Immigration Act, was passed. It was called the McCain-Kennedy legislation, which proposed a 6-year path to legalization and guest worker programs and greater border enforcement. Again, a comprehensive reform. The bill did not get through. Further, but as a result of this proposal, counter-proposals in 2005 began to be proposed by more conservative Republicans. Cornyn and Kyle proposed the Comprehensive Enforcement and Immigration Reform Act, focused only on enforcement. How many of you have heard of the Sensenbrenner bill? The House, that was a Senate bill. The House passed its own bill, which was more restrictive, draconian, no lawful status for temporary workers, criminalization of unlawful presence. Currently, it's an immigration violation to be here unlawfully. This would be a criminal violation. The expansion of alien smuggling, meaning to any help to undocumented workers. The fence construction, which we've heard about. Withholding funds from state governments that do not cooperate with federal authorities. Reduced judicial review in the process of immigration. It led to a lot of demonstrations. So what we remember a few years ago was spurred by the fact that it actually passed the House, although it didn't pass the Senate, in December of 2005. So we have these countervailing forces in Congress. Senator Specter attempted to revive the McCain-Kennedy bill and somehow merge it with the Cornyn-Kyle bill, which was the conservative Republican bill. They included the unlawful presence of Cornyn-Kyle, but they also suggested creating a guest worker program and a conditional status path to legalization, which is considered less or a harder path to legalization. This was a compromise bill by Specter. The Specter bill, again, failed. They also wanted to tack on the DREAM Act, which I'm glad you talked about because I won't talk about it, which is for those who were 15 or under, who were brought by their parents to this country without having a choice, to have a chance to become residents and citizens. The law failed. The final, in 2007, there was an attempt both by the White House again, a moderate bipartisan reform proposal called Secure Borders, Economic Opportunity, Immigration Reform Act of 2007, under the Democrat-controlled Senate, tried to combine Kennedy, McCain, Cornyn, Kyle, and Specter bills together into a new bill that would allow a probationary visa. Now you're learning how Congress works because you have bills that are coming and going, and they're fine, and then being merged, and then being, mishmashed. But the main point is they tried to keep comprehensive reform and also strict border enforcement. The bill failed to get the votes in June of 2007. You might remember all the demonstrations going on because the Democrats could not get closure on discussion of the bill, which they required 60 votes. They didn't get it, and it didn't work. And even though President Bush attempted to intervene to help get closure, the bill died. 1 more minute.
I'm not the bouncer.
You look like the bouncer. The last slide. So in 2007, that was the end of the initiative. But I have to say, it was a very active period for considering comprehensive immigration reform. Very complicated period. During the Obama administration, thus far, given some of the other issues he's been dealing with, economic stimulus, healthcare, Afghanistan, nothing's been done. The only thing that was attempted only last week was to pass the DREAM Act that was attached to a spending bill for defense, the National Defense Authorization Bill for 2011. Guess what? It failed because the entire bill failed because there were a couple of bills that were attached that didn't want to be attached. The reaction to all this debate were legislative initiatives at the state level. Whereas in the 1990s it was California that was leading the charge, this time it's Arizona. Arizona and SB 1070 and their attempt to control immigration by forcing people to show whether they're documented, undocumented citizens or whatever their status is, has drawn a lot of reaction and seems to be forcing the current administration to address the issue again. However, given the midterm elections, what's going to happen is very little is going to be done until after the midterm elections, and depending on the composition of Congress, we don't know what's going to happen between 2010 and 2012. So perhaps comprehensive reform will happen, or perhaps it may have to wait till 2012. What's next? Immigrant trends. 14 million. This is the last slide. 14 million estimated undocumented workers are here, 60 to 70% from Mexico. However, there's been a decline from about 800,000 a year to 500,000 between 2005 2008. Between 2004 2004, there was 800,000. Now the estimate by Pew is about 300,000, so it's declining, probably because of the economic recession. The economics of immigration, they're needed for entrepreneurial reasons and growth, and even in the economic downturn, but the economic downturn strengthens anti-immigrant sentiment. Framing immigration. Politicians, NGOs, pro-immigrant business groups do not need to frame the issue a little bit differently if they're going to do well. However, people are worried about jobs, and so there's not that much of a coalition. The politics of immigration. Moderate Republicans and Democrats want more skilled workers, such as H-1Bs, which is the skilled worker visa, but there are Democratic supporters like unions and security-conscious Republicans who don't want that. The recent battles over health care have cost a lot of political capital for the White House, and it's going to be very difficult for them to initiate a discussion on immigration reform. And the midterms, I said, are creating a little bit of gridlock, and a lot depends on the course of the economic recovery, the composition of Congress in 2010, and the expectations currently are very low that there'll be some sort of consideration of any comprehensive reform for the next 2 or 4 years. And that was the last slide.
Thank you, David. I was expecting one more slide. I was expecting another just one more. But that was a really comprehensive overview of the cycle of immigration. It's really interesting to see that nothing really has changed. You know, it's really a cycle. Our next presenter, just a quick statistic I have here from the Migration Policy Institute of Washington, D.C. 2008, there were 12.1 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. In 2009, that dropped to 11.9 million. And the thinking is that because of the economic downturn of the United States, people are no longer interested in coming. They said even the demand for visas are down. As a matter of fact, they said some families from Mexico are sending money to their families in the United States, which is quite interesting. And that's a good segue into our next presenter, Dr. Rodney Lowman, who's going to talk about some of the factors that influence immigration to the United States, which is pretty interesting. Dr. Lowman is a distinguished professor in IO psychology here at Alliant. He he currently serves. He is our chair. He's the team leader for the IMERIT of San Diego. When serving as Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Lowman was the chief architect of this IMERIT. So we got to thank him for really getting this on the ground and pushing it forward, which attempts to integrate both multicultural and international perspectives to be a cornerstone of our university. Dr. Lowman received his PhD in IO and clinical psychology from Michigan State University and is widely published, particularly in the areas of professional ethics, career assessment, and consulting psychology. He's currently the editor of the Consulting Psychology Journal, Practice and Research. Hearty warm applause for it.
You only have 4 minutes.
In conclusion, most of what we have talked about so far deals with immigration from the perspective of the United States. And what I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about is what are the forces in other countries that drive people to want to immigrate, not just to the United States, but to many other countries as well. And I'm going to give you one specific example and just go through that briefly so you get a better feel for this. Let us first note that countries can either be net immigrators, in the sense that there are more people coming in than going out of the country, or they can be net immigrators in terms of more people going out of the country rather than coming in. The United States has a net immigration rate, IM, of 4.32 And that is defined as the difference between the number of persons entering and leaving a country during the year per 1,000 people. And it's based on mid-year populations. So this means that 4.32 more people per 1,000 come into the U.S. than leave it. We rank in the United States 25th in the world. The first highest, according to some lists at least, is the United Arab Emirates, which has 22.98 people coming in per 1,000 versus those going out. And the highest in the other direction are the Northern Mariana Islands, which had, in the most recent figures I could find, 89.70 going out per 1,000 versus those coming into the country. Now, you may have heard or seen in Newsweek recently there is a push by some to revoke, in effect, or repeal the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment gives the right of anyone born in the United States to be a citizen. And in this Newsweek issue, this is a list of some of the people who were what are called anchor babies. That is, they were born in the U.S. to first-generation folks. And you can see there's a lot of famous people up there who we would not be claiming as American citizens or American luminaries if they had not been allowed to come into the parents had not been allowed to come in. Now, very briefly, because in the interest of time, last summer I had the privilege of spending a month in the Philippines, both consulting to a college and lecturing and learning about a lot more about the country. And so I want to talk about some of what I learned there and help you see, with this one example, what some of the factors are that cause people to want to leave a country and to go to another one. And I think, as you will see, it is complicated, but it also makes a lot of sense. Philippines, to begin with, is a land of contrast. There are parts of Manila that look as up-to-date and modern as New York or Los Angeles or San Diego. There's also the other part, which is impoverished, and where they are many people who do not have enough food. And I think you'll see as we paint the economic profile of the country what some of the factors are driving this forward. So here are some comparative statistics. The Philippines has now 99 million people. They're about to go over 100 million. And you can see that first of all, they are the 12th largest country by population in the world. And compared to their Asian neighbors, they are one of the biggest players if you leave out China and India. Thailand, for example, has 66 million. Japan is bigger, but not by much, at 126 million. Indonesia was a bit of a surprise to me that its population is the fourth largest in the world at 243 million. But the Philippines is a major player, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Their gross domestic product is 160 billions or trillions of dollars. In any case, ranks 48th or 47th in the world, depending on which list you look at. However, the per capita income is quite small. And if you look at where the per capita income is versus its neighbors, you can see that the Philippines has a problem in terms of the income, average income, per capita income. Take a look at this list quickly, and you can see that it ranks higher than Vietnam, but not by a whole lot. It ranks only slightly higher than India, which has a huge population over which to distribute that. And China is actually almost twice as much per capita income as what you see in the Philippines. Thailand is higher. Japan is way higher, 32,600. And Singapore, which ranks 8th highest in the world, is, when these figures were done, 50,300 per capita. So think about what that's like in terms of what the income distribution is, and then consider this. The distribution of income in the Philippines is highly lopsided, very lopsided. The lowest 10% of families earn collectively only 2.4% of the gross domestic product. The highest 10%, 31.2%. Huge lopsided difference. 32.9% of the population lives below the poverty line. And you've heard of these classifications of how many people live on less than $1 a day. For the Philippines, 22.6% of those in the poorest classes live on under $1 a day, and 45% under $2 a day. This is the heart, I would argue, of the problem and what's driving much of the immigration. The upper classes by income in the Philippines, less than 1%. We already talked about how much those people take off of the GDP. The middle class is only 20 families out of 100. 80% of the families in the Philippines, 100 million people almost, are in the lowest classes by income. And in fact, this is not getting better. From the period from 1997 to 2003, about 4 families in every 100 that had been in the middle classes slipped to the lower classes by income. Philippines is not without assets. It is a large country for Asia. It is 72nd in area in the world, and it is close physically to some of the largest markets in the world. Here are some of the other assets they have. 92.6% literacy rate of those who are 15 years and older, and it is evenly divided between men and women. This makes the Philippines, from what I can figure out, the second largest English-speaking country, or the data rather, make Philippines second largest English-speaking country in the world. Canada has, I think, only 30 million or maybe 40 million people. The UK, I think, is like 60 million. There are over 100 million people. They train their schools in from elementary to high school and college in English. So you have 100 million English-speaking folks in this country. And yet they are spending, they are 158th out of 180 of the GDP is spent on education. Why is that? I would argue it is in large measure because the professionals, the teachers, the professors, and so forth, are being underpaid. Let's look at these figures quickly. I put on here the average monthly income. The average monthly income in Philippines. I also added in Mexico and in the United States for selected professional occupations. Teachers, for example, after going through 4 years of college and perhaps more, bring home a grand total in U.S. dollars equivalent of around $250 a month. In Mexico, it's actually considerably higher at $651, but that's not high when you compare it to the U.S., where the average is over $4,000. Nurses, one of the biggest exports of the Philippines until recently, nurses were making $144 a month, and there are now something as the immigration into the U.S. and other countries like Saudi Arabia, nurses have cut back. There are 200,000 unemployed nurses in the Philippines. Professors, we have some here in the audience, average income per month of $299. Engineers, $406. The only occupation you might make a little money at in the Philippines is airplane pilot with a little over $1,000 a month, and they are grossly underpaid. And while I was there, a bunch of pilots from the flagship airline quit en masse to join another airline in another country. You can see that the rate for the U.S. for airline pilots and for Mexico as well is considerably higher. What this has resulted in is that the Philippines strategy is in part a strategy of immigration, of sending people out. And what I naively asked in a prior trip to the Philippines, somebody who was fairly prominent in the country, the naive question, well, why don't you just pay them more? And so they'll stay in the country instead of exiting. And the response was, oh, we depend on that money coming in to the country, and that is a major source of our revenue, is the money that comes in. I gave a number of talks last summer to groups about career issues and so forth, and in every audience that I gave that talk to, one of the questions was, what do you do if your parents force you to go into an occupation and a career that you don't want to go into, like nursing or teaching or whatever? Because the family, in what is essentially a collectivist culture in many respects, family expects that the children will train not just for what they're good at doing or what they want to do, but oftentimes at what is most exportable to going to another country. And so there are many people that are training in areas like nursing and teaching and so forth with the express goal of being able to get out and to send money back, which is part of the equation as well. We said that the U.S. is a net importer of people. The Philippines is a net exporter of people, and their number is down at the bottom here, minus 1.31. This is a serious problem for the Philippines, because what it means is they are exporting their best and brightest talent to go to other countries. So we, in San Diego and California, we have better teachers and better nurses and so forth because of the import of talent that we have here. At the same time, you cannot understand the pressures on these issues unless you understand what's driving it. And so I need to wrap this up. One of the thought questions I would leave with you is, if we want to make a change in immigration, we need to think about how can we help countries do more to build a middle class and a bigger middle class in other countries. If you have, I submit to you, a middle class by income that is only 20% of the population, you have a prescription, and 80% in the lowest class, you have a prescription for people leaving the country. And the final question that I would leave with you as a thought question as you think about immigration is, suppose by an accident of birth you were born in one of the families that is impoverished in another country, and where you went through the training and education to learn another language and to learn a profession and so forth, and your reward for that as a teacher or a nurse or a professor was going to be to make a couple of $100s a month, what would you do? I think that helps us put immigration in perspective about some of the pressures and the forces that are behind the scenes that help us understand this. Thanks.
Thank you, Rodney. Pretty interesting. We don't spend time thinking about those forces that drive immigration. Thank you lots for that. Very insightful. And I hope it leaves you with some things to consider. Some of you might know this because you've experienced it in your own country. Our next speaker, our next homegrown expert, is Dr. Linna Wang. Students here. Okay, we'll.
Student was that?
Yes, it's Dr. Yeah, we have our student here. Dr. Linna Wang, who is going to talk about acculturation, mental health issues, and immigration. Essentially getting into the immigrant experience. What happens with an immigrant and what are the repercussions or the ramifications. Dr. Linna Wang, she has a very, very short bio. is the site director and faculty of the Marriage and Family Therapy Program of San Diego campus. Her research interests include mental health service delivery system, immigration, acculturation, and their relationships to mental health. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. I'm going to be quick. So now we talked about why people immigrate and who's in, who's out. Now my topic is more about people who are in. Okay, and then even with this economic downturn, we know that in some, possibly, we hypothesize, possibly because of the economic downturn, the immigration inflow slows down. But there are other hypotheses. And yet, we are not seeing a whole lot of people leaving the country. Okay, and they even have their people from their home country send money here to sustain them to stay in this country. So we got the message, they are here to stay. So about immigration, is one issue is who is in, who is out. That's a that's a government policy. And another issue is once they are in, how do we manage that? Okay. So when talking about for most of us CSPP folks, and how does acculturation impact our mental health? Okay. We oftentimes hear people say, oh, they don't want to be part of us. They don't want to. And if you want to be in this country, join the program. Okay, as if people don't make the decision not to be part of this country. Actually, acculturation is a process that every newcomer goes through. Only how you go through it. Okay, so acculturation is a process of adopting the culture traits or social patterns of another group. And that includes attitudes, values, customs, beliefs, and behaviors. So every newcomer goes through this process, and how to interact with their home culture, home group. So only is the manner you go through this process. According to Barry's model, there are 4 types of strategies, and one is assimilation, which has been pretty much the American expectation. Assimilation is forget about what your home country cultures and values is, and adopt to U.S. Way of life and U.S. way of thinking and behaving. And separation is try to avoid positive interaction with others, and solely hold on to the culture of origin. Okay, and the third one is marginalization. Is we don't show any interest in their own culture nor the home culture. Okay, totally marginalize themselves, or integration and maintain one's own culture at the same time interact positively with the home culture. And from these, we seem to see this acculturation strategy is only used by newcomers by themselves. But acculturation process is an interactive process. It's a two-way traffic. It involves both the immigrants as well as the home country, and and oftentimes it's not we decide. When I say we, because I'm an immigrant myself, it's not I decide to be marginalized. It's not I decide to separate. Oftentimes it's a reaction to how they are treated in the environment. For example, my personal example, okay, this is after I got naturalized. And I had a huge party for my naturalization. And I invited all my friends and colleagues and all this, made a huge announcement, I'm an American citizen now. Okay, yet in my discussion, like all my friends and in the political discussion, and one of my friends would say, Linna, you are offending American people. And okay, so when you have such a reaction, and again at that moment, you are not American. That's the message you get, even though I have a paper to show you I'm American citizen. And then when you get this kind of reaction and that treatment, oftentimes people choose something different. Okay, so it's a two-way interaction in this process. So how do these strategies work? And from research, we know that a less adapted group is marginalized. People who don't want to be associated with their own culture, don't want to be associated with the host culture, and that group fare the worst. And the intermediate do okay is a assimilation group and a separation group. Okay, assimilate and forget about your own culture and totally become American. That's many of us have this feel that's the pressure to be. Okay, and you can do well. Okay, do okay. And the separation, because I just live in Chinatown, I don't interact as long as I have a critical mass, and I can survive and do okay. And more adapted is the integration group. They are integrate with the host culture in a positive way, and that group is research shows that are more likely to be successful. But how do you define success? Okay, and people refer to success differently, and children tend to refer to host country. They measure their success what's the reference point? Their host country and my friend's family. Okay, my classmates' family. That's their reference point. But for parents, the first generation, they tend to refer to their home country. Okay, in our home country, we have a shed. Now we have a studio apartment. We're doing well. But for their children, it's my friends have 5-bedroom house and a huge backyard with swimming pool. So that's their reference point. So how do you define success? So here you can see the conflict between parents and the children. And also, how do you, for literature shows there's a paradox of acculturation. Okay, so there is an inverse relationship, negative correlation between SES and health, including mental health. Okay, in U.S., we tend to measure success by dollar signs. Okay, and for people who are making higher income, okay, they tend to have bad health, including bad mental health, and that's including those who there are researches showing that people who compare more acculturated with less acculturated groups, and more acculturated groups tend to have higher risk behavior, like smoking, drinking, and unsafe sex, and less acculturated groups tend to have more health if you measure it by the birth. Okay, the size of the head, the weight of the baby, okay, and the unacculturated group tend to have much better health outcome. Okay, for example, compare with non-Latino whites, Latinos in the U.S. have a worse socioeconomic status, yet Latinos have a lower all-cause mortality rather than compared with non-Latino whites. Okay, and probably we heard that the Hmong and among immigrants and the refugees, and they are termed as the least acculturated group. They refuse to acculturate, and yet if you compare them with a more acculturated group, they're baby and they have a high birth rate, yet their babies are in much better status, and their child abuse is much lower compared with the rest of the group. And again, compare with the more acculturated and less acculturated groups tend to have healthier baby. We talk about less lifetime depression. That does not mean that they're okay. They are more likely to have a transitional depression and anxiety, but less likely to have lifetime depression. And they have less risky behaviors. Okay, for example, smoking, drinking. Okay, so why is it? And we don't have and because there's such a research, we cannot say what caused such paradox. what we do know is there are many hypotheses about this phenomena. Okay, one is we have to ask the question: acculturation to what? Okay, is acculturate to the mainstream American and usually this white American culture and values and behavior. Okay, so one hypothesis is when you're in this process of acculturation, while you adapt to the American culture and values, at the same time you let go some protective factors in your own culture. Okay, and acculturation have both protective and risk factors. Okay, okay. So we have, so for example, research shows more acculturated Latinos exercise more. Okay, they consume less fat, and they have less body mass, so they are physically more fit. So that's the acculturation is a protective factor. At the same time, and in adapting white American beliefs and lifestyle, the protective culture-bound health behaviors and may be lost. For example, some food processed food companies now target Latino family. Okay, Latino women tend to cook their meal from scratch and tend to be very healthy cooking. Yet, as Latino women get more educated, get into the professional arena, they have less time to cook. So they start to produce packaged food for Latino families. And we know the health benefit of this kind of food. So when we adapt these, be more acculturated, and it can be a risk factor. So acculturation rate different, and this is a PowerPoint I did for another. I use adolescents as an example. Adolescence discrepancy and depends on many factors. Depends on the age they come into the country. Depends on the length they stay in this country and the language they use, and especially SES is a huge factor. And perceived discrimination. The more discrimination you perceive, the less likely you are willing to reach out to interact positively with the host country. Okay, therefore less acculturated, as well as religious belief and personal belief, and also immigration status. We have voluntary immigrants and involuntary immigrants. Okay, and part of the Hmong community, they are perceived as so stuck in their own way, they refused because they are refugees. Okay, they didn't want to come. Okay. Also, personality is a factor, and in accommodation from the dominant society, how much and you are accepted. Okay, the more you are accepted, the more you are likely you are going to reach out, interact positively, and to become the integration category. Okay. So it is not a linear process. It changes. Okay, and somebody can have positive interaction for a period of time, and one negative interaction can set you back. Okay, in my own example, when I was told I was insulting American population for a while, and I said, I'm not going to talk with anyone. I don't want to insult anyone, or at the same time being insulted. And children are more likely to be acculturated because they interact more with their peers. Okay, so hypothesis: why adult children are more likely to acculturate and then have some risky behaviors. One of the hypotheses is that at home country they were not as exposed to drug use. Okay. That's one of the reasons a lot of immigrant families just hold on to their children so tight because they are scared. They never knew about, in their home country, they didn't know about this drug, alcohol, and the premarital sex. And now they feel this whole environment is so scary, they hold on to their children. Drug use is a byproduct of socialization. Okay, it's cool. My friends do it. It's a part of American way of life. Let me try it. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Just tie it up, just tie the ends so you have
okay. All right. Be aware of oversimplification. Just because there is a correlation between acculturation and adolescence behavior, and don't say that acculturation is bad and cost and adolescence behavior. It's multi-phases and the several factors impact this process. And social power is a found in play in acculturation. Again, this power. And I want to add on, I don't have this in my slides. U.S. is not the only country that are experiencing this difficulty in integrating immigrants. Even China. Now, China is known for exporting its people. I'm one of them. And yet, now China is experiencing immigration. Immigrants from Vietnam and from Thailand are coming into. So every country, industrialized or being industrialized right now, have to go through this process. So the key point is how to integrate them. And U.S. being the beacon of freedom, beacon of liberty, and I believe we have the responsibility to show to the rest of the world how to humanely integrate the immigrants. Thank you.
Thank you, Linna. I hate to be doing this. We have a time crunch, and there's so much to say. I know there's so much to say. Our last presentation, I showed some of you could relate, especially as immigrants, whether it's one generation or two generations removed, to what Linna was saying. That's a nice segue into our next speaker. His name is Noel Puga, and he is a San Diego City College student who is going to be joining us, transferring, I think, into psychology sometime either in the spring or this spring. Okay? He's going to share his experiences with us. He has some profound experiences, and he's going to share some experiences with us. Some of us might be able to relate. See if you can find the slide is on here. His slide, Phyllis?
If it was sent to me, it's on.
Yes, okay. So. You want to start talking, and then you can help with this, please? You can start talking, and then we can take that up. That's Linna.
Well, I was invited here to share my experience as an immigrant. I'm a little nervous, sorry, but I'm going to try to hold it. I pretty much just going to talk about my experience, how we came to the United States and the process of immigration, things like that. So I'm going to start by in 1996, my father was able to become a legal resident of the United States. At that time, we were living in Mexico, my mom and my sister. So 2 years after, he decided to bring us to the United States in 1998. And that time, me and my mom and my older sister, we had the visa B1, B2, the border crossing card. So we were able to cross legally. We were not able to live here, but we did. We're staying here for a while. Between those, until 1990, between those 2 years, we were moving back and forward. We'll stay here for a couple of months, and we'll go back to Mexico and then come back. So in 1990, my dad said, you know what, it's enough. We have to stay here. They want you guys to go to school here, have a vacation and things like that. So he decided to bring his family over, so we ended up staying here. But on the weekends, we would go to Mexico, visit family, and come back. And in 1994, it was my sister's 15th birthday. So they planned a quinceañera and everything in Mexico for her. And we went to the quinceañera, and coming back on Sunday, that weekend, what we would do, me and my mom, we just had the tourist visa pretty much, and by that time I already had two young sisters, U.S. citizen sisters, and my dad was a resident of the United States, so we couldn't cross with him. We would cross walking, and my dad and my sisters would cross by car. And the weekend, we crossed as usual, and my mom crossed first, and she was given the okay to cross, but they stopped me, and they were interrogating me. They started asking me where did I live, like my age, and what school I was going to. So I thought in my head, okay, I can respond to this. I understood everything he was telling me, the officer was telling me and asking me. So I just started talking in Spanish. But I was answering to his questions. And I did, and he just stopped and looked at me like, how are you able to understand everything I'm telling you if you live in Mexico? Well, and I just stayed quiet. I thought, oh, because the teacher's English in school. That's what I said. So like, he just looked at me. He came back to me more questions, and then like he told me, you know what, call your mom. And I didn't want to. I stayed quiet, and I just looked at him and like, call your mom. If not, I'm gonna call her. So I just called my mom. She was about to already cross the door to be in San Isidro. So I called her mom, and she just came back, and she started interrogating my mom, and my mom she got tired of it. Like she was asking too many questions, so she decided to tell the truth. She said, you know what, we do live in San Diego, so that's it. And so they grabbed us. They took us to this office. They took our the tourist visas, and they cut them in half and threw them away to the trash. And they told us to go back to TJ, to Tijuana. So we did, and we had to wait there for 2 or 3 hours because my dad was already in San Isidro waiting for us. And we did at the time we didn't have no cell phones, so we had to wait for him to find out or to figure it out. So 2 hours passed by, almost 3 hours, and he'll find us. And we told him what happened, and he was really pissed off, and especially at me. And I just didn't want to talk at that time because I was afraid. And so he took us to my aunt's house, and it took us about a week. We stayed there for a week, and then we found somebody to cross us over from Mexico to San Isidro. So that was a Tuesday, so pretty much at 5 o'clock, we met with the coyote, and we were talking to him. I was talking to him, said, like, he gave me the okay, said, okay, he looks like he can be trusted, so okay, so I'm going to leave it with him. So he did that, and by 1 in the morning, we were home. We crossed, I guess it was easier back then to cross, and we just had to jump 2 fences. It wasn't easy, but it's easier than now. And we did that, and we got home, and then I went back to school. My mom she was the house. She would take care of my sister, and my dad would he went back to work. So everything went back to normal. But then my dad thought about it. You know, I'm a resident. I can help you guys out with the immigration process. So I'm good. He submitted all the paperwork. So for me and mom and my sister to become legalized, and he did that. He got a lawyer. He submitted all the paperwork needed to begin the process. But about 2 months later, we got the application approval. Mail, we got a letter saying the application was approved. But 6 months after that, my dad passed away. So the thing is, my dad and my 2 sisters, young sisters, they were able to go to Mexico. So my dad, every 2 weeks or every other week, he would go and visit his mom and my uncles and everyone, well, the whole family. And that we couldn't go, so he would do that once in a while. That weekend, my sister didn't want to go because they were 5 and 6 years old, so they didn't want to go with him. They wanted to stay home. So he left by himself. He left on a Friday night, and on Sunday we received a phone call from my aunt telling us that my dad had passed away, that he got murdered in Mexicali. That's where we're from Mexicali. So my mom, she didn't know what to do. Pretty much, she wanted to stay here, but she wanted to go to the funeral and the whole process. She wanted to be there. My dad, so gave him the last goodbye. And so after my aunt talked to her for a while, she said, you know what, well, let's go. And my aunt took us. They were going to leave me at San Diego, but they didn't find anybody to leave me with, so they just you know what, let's go. So we left, and when we got there after the funeral, my mom called a lawyer to tell him what had happened, and he said, you know what, well, everything's going to be canceled. The whole process will be canceled. We can't do nothing about it. So but my mom said, you know what, we have to go back. I don't want to stay here, and you guys are going to school. You should start going to school. So I want you to go. So I want to be over there. So we did come back with the help of 2 of her friends. They helped us to cross by car. So we did, and so it was really difficult for the whole family, but especially for my mom, because she was back when my dad was alive. She would only take care of my sisters and me in the house. But then she was undocumented. She started working 2 or 3 jobs to support the family. And I was going to school, and I wanted to drop out so I can work and help her out, but she didn't want me to, so I started working on the weekends. And then, I just got 2 minutes. So 9 years after, my mom was able to become.
The video.
I thought it was going to be.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So 9 years after, my mom was able to become a legal resident with the help of the Chicano Federation lawyers, and then last year, I was able to begin my process, and I became a legal resident in December last year. And the reason I wanted to talk about this, the whole Bill Cemetery, because when in 2007 I started going to college, because one of the reasons was the DREAM Act, because if I go to college I'll be able to become legalized, or like my family goes, oh, you should get married, but I said, you know what, I'm going to get married for the purpose of getting my papers. So, you know what, I was just like, I want to go to school, so the DREAM Act, I know it wasn't a sure thing, but I wanted to try it out. So I started going to school. I got accepted to this program, to the Puente program at City College, and that program showed me how important it was to do community service, to help the community. So I started getting involved with a group in City College. It was the AB 540 support club, so they would support undocumented students. We would pretty much, when I started volunteering for them, I kind of saw there was a lot of undocumented students at the college, but nobody was speaking out. They were afraid of saying they were undocumented. So what I started doing, I did an event at school, so I did documentary about immigration, and just told everybody, you know what, I am a documented student, an AB 540 student. So I told them my reasons for why I was speaking out, and I told them people shouldn't be afraid of saying they were undocumented. So, and then later on, I started volunteering with Border Angels, and that's when I found out about the Whole Bill Cemetery, that there's about 600 or more undocumented immigrants buried there. And the reason they're buried there is that they're identifiable, they don't have an ID, or they go unclaimed. So I started getting involved there, and then for people that don't have an ID, they don't know their name, they put Jane Doe or John Doe. Jane Doe if it's a female, John Doe if it's a male. And then for the people that go unclaimed, they do put their name and a number to them. So for an event, when I started volunteering for Border Angels, they had an event, the No Borders Art Exhibition. So I did this project. They asked me if I wanted to volunteer and do something, and I did this project. And what I did, I got these crosses, and I put different flags in them from Latin America, Central America. And I put opportunity, because I believe opportunity and family are the biggest reasons why people immigrate to the United States. A lot of people want to be reunited with their family, so that's why they might get to the United States. And then I put dream, because my dad and I and everybody of my family had a dream. We wanted to be part of the American dream pretty much. And then hope, because we always come with all this hope, esperanza. We're we're gonna work, we're gonna work hard so we can get money and support our family back in Mexico, build a house, buy a car, and effort. I put effort in here because it takes a lot of effort. Because the documentary I showed at school shows how 2 people from Nicaragua came to the United States, so pretty much they have to cross borders. They risk their life every time they cross the border, especially too with the Mexican and Guatemala border and the United States and Mexico border. So that's why I put effort, because we should see the effort it takes for people to come here to the United States. And then the last one is courage. I think valor, because we should appreciate, we should see that knowledge, the courage it takes to come here and make it here. And that's it. Thank you.
Really impressive. At this point, I'm going to ask the panelists to come forth, and then we're going to have our discussant. Could you just have a seat? And then we have very last, before we wanted to have a time for dialogue and everything, but some of our presenters had a lot to say. So our final, we're going to have them here, and you can ask questions or make comments. For those of you who can stay, I know some of you have classes and that kind of thing. For those of us who stay, we can probably do that. Dr. Barry Goodman, is an assistant professor of political science in the International Studies program at Marshall Grossman School of Management. He has published and given several talks in both the United States and England on issues pertaining to transnational migration, specifically on the political and economic effects of migration on those left behind in sending communities. So he's going to kind of bring everything together and then shoot your questions at our panelists.
The first thing I want to say is we learned a lot from our panelists today. I am still kind of swimming in all the information that we got, just a variety of information from just the basics of what we're dealing with in terms of immigration and immigration policy within the United States. And then moving from immigration policy, talking about the historical effects, some examples in terms of what's going on in the Philippines, and some of the psychological effects. more than I ever thought I would get out of one discussion. One of the things as I was sitting there thinking about what I wanted to talk about as some final notes, the reality is very simple. Immigration is not something that's new to America. It is somewhat popularized today by this SB 1070 and the kind of horrific way in which the state of Arizona has attempted to deal with a real situation. But the reality is that historically America has dealt with the question of immigration from the very beginning of the roots of America. We can think of all of the examples that Dr. Felsen gave us and many, many more. But a few of the things that I was thinking about in terms of ideas and things to mention is some of the ways that we define immigration. We have, unfortunately, in this particular day and age, defined immigration in a way that we almost demonize undocumented immigration. The reason why we somewhat demonize it is because the war on terror has been linked to undocumented immigration. We have 14,000 members of our police forces that are governing the southern border, with about 1,500 in Canada, even though the Mexican border is considerably smaller than the Canadian border. And we think about what type of people are coming across the border. And we have always had a sense of a little bit of xenophobia, a little isolationism when we come to American politics. And I think our scholars today have shown that while we come to this country as immigrants, we come for a variety of reasons. I love the idea of family and hope, and of course we come for economic opportunity. Unfortunately, since 9/11, there's been an agenda. That agenda is terrorists are coming too. And there's scary people with drugs and drug trafficking, and we have to prevent them from coming in. And so now anyone that crosses the border without documentation is assumed to be some kind of criminal, felon, a person that perhaps is of unsavory character. And I'll leave with this particular comment, and then we'll do some discussion. This is from a colleague of mine at Vassar, Professor Rueda, and she wrote, "Undocumented immigrants, and often immigrants in general, are so thoroughly individualized and demonized in the process, while the attention is shifted away from far more systemic factors that contribute to immigration patterns. The discussion about undocumented immigrants often centers on their lack of respect for the law. But what the thousands of large and small businesses, as well as individual families who seek out cheap immigrant labor in order to build homes, pick fruit, tend lawns, clean houses, and care for children, where is the discussion about the responsibility that American companies and American citizens have to bear for the immigration patterns that we see?" When I started to think about that, I thought we also have a very clear responsibility to this immigration issue. It's a good thing we're here today because we have to discuss it. We have to begin to understand better that those people that are coming to this country looking for an opportunity, looking for hope, and trying to find it, are not our enemies. So with that, if we have questions for our panelists, we would be happy to take them.
So to go back for a minute to the question about the quotas on immigration and so forth, since 9/11, and particularly in the early years after that, there was a great cutback in the ease of getting into the country. Whatever else we want to think about this complicated issue, we also have to think about the implications of what happens when we make it more difficult to get into the country for people who used to come to the United States because we had the best science in the world and this was the only place to go. Guess what? In the meantime, other countries are developing world-class universities. And there are many other choices besides the United States as to where you can go and get a first-rate world-class education. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I do think we have to factor in what is happening, particularly if we develop a more xenophobic attitude towards immigration. We potentially are going to be the ones that suffer as a result of that when we're no longer on the cutting edge as we once singularly were, and how do we build an immigration policy that is consistent with the realities of what the world has become and is becoming. Our own university, USIU/Alliant, suffered as a result of that event, in the sense that we had difficulty bringing folks in from other parts of the world. That's eased up a bit now, but I think you see some of the consequences, the unintended consequences that can come in, particularly if folks are able to frame the issue in terms of the worst feared things. And that's for any politician today, and in the current environment, it would be very difficult to have a rational, sane immigration policy, because it would be pounced on really quickly. And I think President Obama was probably walking a fine line in response to the earlier question about, if you go too far out, you're going to get a lot of kickback. On the other hand, from the perspective of the country, we need to think about what the consequences are for our future and for future generations if we no longer are the melting pot or the place where folks want to go to get the premier education and needed.
There's several issues with that I think are brought to mind. That the economy certainly, a lot of people are out of work, and other people are coming over to get those same jobs. Yet, who outsources jobs? United States. Why do we do that? Cheaper?
Somebody you had your hand up?
Yeah, in terms of two things I haven't heard really addressed are the more controversial issues. The side of what's the negative impact of either too much immigration, the numbers they're trying to figure out, like what should be the right number, or undocumented illegal immigration on the country. And it's been mostly philosophical to me, or moral or values issues, as opposed to let's look also at the objective factors that a country is trying to address. So that's one issue that I think we really need to not assume it's all racism, and that's, all those factors are in it. But I think there are also some negative impacts in our own internal politics of the federal government not taking responsibility and assuming the cost of the immigration, illegal or not, in terms of health care, education, border control and security, all that. That's why then the states are, of course, objective, because they're having to absorb the cost and the staffing to try to address those issues.
I can comment. There's, do you want to comment first?
Go ahead.
It's true that, particularly since the 1980s, there's been a greater number of problems in terms of the burden on social services at the level of the state. And this is something, dealing with that is a huge budget issue, particularly here in California at this time, and it's been like that for years. But I think, for example, there's one of the criticisms is going back to the skills issue. There's now a dearth of engineers and scientists that are being produced here in the country to staff, the defense industry, for example, and that's being felt. So the defense industry, which I would argue is an extremely valuable part of the country because of national security, needs to bring people in from out of the country. And the way it's done currently is you have someone like Bill Gates getting on his private jet and going to Washington and testifying in front of the Senate and saying, please let in more H-1B immigrants. So the process actually works in a very informal way that in order to increase the cap. We need really comprehensive immigration reform to address issues both of enforcement, but also creating a system that allows the best minds that are needed for this economy to get in. So when you say the economic impact, the fact that there isn't a logical system right now, and it's very, it's like a collage of policies, and as the speaker before me stated, Stephanie, that often immigration attorneys get the case wrong, and definitely those people on the border get the situation wrong many times. So we need a more rational system. So one of the proposals, which has been proposed by many people and actually rejected both by President Bush and President Obama, is a point system which is in place in Canada, Britain, and Australia, based on the level of education attained, certain experiences, certain, your age and status and all these things. You get a certain number of points, which makes you eligible to apply to become a resident, and often you get a higher skilled worker, like you get a PhD or an MD or a JD person coming into Canada. And that system is in place in many other countries, but has been rejected here for various reasons. So because there's preference for the family preference and the employment preference system. So there's a lot of things, as you say, that need to be corrected in order to fix the system, both in terms of creating incentives for the proper way of immigration, and also creating disincentives for people to come in an undocumented fashion. I agree.
It was shocking to hear that there didn't seem to be any basis for them even coming up with the numbers. What was going to be allowed, it didn't have anything to do with anything. That was amazing.
Thank you. I also just wanted to point out that a lot of undocumented immigrants actually try to pay taxes, sometimes in violation of federal law, because they want to, be proper citizens, basically. So it's not just people who are coming in and trying to suck up all the social services without repaying anything.
Okay, I know there are lots more questions. Unless you guys have time, a couple more questions. I think it's the young lady in the back.
I wanted to comment on, you talked about the issue of what brings a lot of the immigration, as far as poverty, and I have a personal interest in this issue because my own family came here undocumented, and I come from a background of no education. My mom doesn't have primary education. So the fact that there is, in my opinion, very little being done, or nothing being done as far as providing a way for people who come from those low backgrounds with no education, no way of being able to come into the country legally. What option does that leave? What can you expect? And so I think that is an important focus as well. Yes, you want people to come in who are skilled workers, but the problem is that people are coming here undocumented because they need to get out of the country to have a better life. So they're going to find a way to come, even if it's risking their life. So that needs to be addressed. That's my concern.
I agree as well.
Lisa?
I think piggybacking on that, and Noel, you have said that the City College has an AB 540 group. So is that nationwide, or is that something the City College just started?
Well, the AB 540 is for there's a Assembly Bill 540 that allows documented students and out-of-state students to pay regular tuition fee instead of I remember in 1999 I tried to go to college and I had to pay $180 per unit. And with the Assembly Bill 540, it allows us to pay right now $26 per unit, like everyone, like the regular resident. But right here it's AB 540, but in 12 states in the United States, they have that. Like in Texas, they have financial aid for undocumented students, and we don't have that here. So pretty much AB 540 is a support that supports emotionally and financially. We try to do whatever we can, because most of us, the members, are undocumented. So we always schedule those. We send to a job, or job is not flexible enough, they don't let us. If we miss a day, we get fired, things like that. So we're changing members. So it's kind of hard to keep up with scholarships. So we try to do fundraisers and things like that. We'll ask people to donate money for undocumented students. So what we're trying to do is better ourselves, and we don't want to my family say, oh, you should get married to become legalized. I don't want that. I don't want to do it. I prefer to go to college. Come on.
There's really nice girls there.
I have support from my family, not as much, but some. Some of the students don't have any support. They're right here by themselves. And they have to make it on their own. They have to work 2 jobs and go to school or part-time, but they're making it on their own.
So just to respond quickly to some pieces of the issues about undocumented. Politicians who want to garner antagonism, they don't refer to undocumented folks. They refer to illegal aliens.
Aliens, yes.
Like they're people that came from another planet. And it's a way of grouping everybody together into this status of folks who are terrorist threats or whatever. But the reality is, ask yourself, just as I raised the question in the Philippines, what would you do if you were in that situation? What does it take for somebody to risk the things that they risk, potential loss of life and so forth, to come into another country where the opportunities are better? And I would argue chances are you are getting the more motivated people, the people who have more interest in getting ahead and so forth. And we need to think very carefully about what the consequences are of in effect, cutting that off.
I want to address what you raised. It is a legitimate concern about the social cost of the illegal immigrants who oftentimes come with low education and low earning potential. That also, from data you can see no matter how Hudson slice it, and the first wave of so-called illegal immigrants with low income and low earning potential, they do cost more social resources. However, the current policy keeps them and their children in that status, and they will, without the education, without the legal status, they can never make enough money to pay tax. So that's yet another reason we really need to reform the immigration. So it is a legitimate concern, but current policy keeps it that way.
I want to add something. A concrete example is the DREAM Act. If the DREAM Act were to pass, you would have 300,000 people who would be eligible to go to college, who would then finish a degree, these are students who were actually, there are some students at the top of their class, they'd finish their degree in college, they'd get jobs, they would take care of their parents and siblings who may currently be using social services. It's actually a logical thing to legalize people at working age, at the beginning of their working career. It saves the state tremendous billions of dollars. But because you talked about the philosophy of it, in the Congress, immigration remains at the level of ideology. And the pragmatism hasn't broken through. The DREAM Act is a very logical piece of legislation to reduce the burden on the state, but it's been rejected again several times.
Just a 10-second thing I'd add to that, and that is that you also have to look at the replacement rate of population in the United States. We have 300 million folks, and except for immigrants, and except for the Latino immigrants, we would be losing population. We would be below the replacement rate. That's my 10 seconds.
Oh, good. That was good. I think we have Estella. We take Estella and two more comments. Let's see. Estella?
Well, I thought that we should not forget the last comment of Dr. Goodman.
Yes. What was that?
About responsibility. We will leave this room and say, well, it's still an issue. Anyway, it's still a problem, so what? I think what is important is we leave this room and think of the fact that, we are in a society that everything is being institutionalized, and we forget the human dimension. That we leave this room, that we still have a responsibility to one another to better understand what this immigration problem is all about. And thank you, Rodney, for using the Philippines as a It is not easy for any group to accept one side of Rodney's presentation. That the Philippines is very impoverished nation, etc. But at the same time, at the end, that this country should realize is that you got the best and the brightest of Filipinos.
All right, yes. A good example.
But anyway, I was just going to remind us that we have got responsibility to one another.
Right.
At least to understand the immigration problem very well.
Right.
And not be a cause of discrimination or demonizing
Right.
So that's my last.
Thank you. And that's what I hope we do. Okay, we have time for 2 more comments. Mahogany, you were going to say, and then the young lady across the
There's one back there. She's been right there.
Oh, I'm sorry, you out of position. Okay, go ahead. Let's do Mahogany.
Excuse my name to be on this topic. I've learned a lot today. If, like you said, that we have a responsibility, if, say, the Philippines or the countries send their best and their brightest here, what does it leave their country with? Why is it that the best and the brightest don't stay in the country, and we, who have a surplus of the best and the brightest, not some of us go over and help build that country? I mean, this is my naivety asking this question. I don't know a lot.
It's a great question, and it's a question I raised, is what would it take for you to keep more of your best and brightest there? Because right now, you are exporting your best teachers, your best nurses, and so forth. We're able to get jobs, send money back. Clearly, one of the things it would take is pay them more money. $250 a month is not enough to be a college graduate and taking on some of society's most difficult challenges. You raise an important question, and the question is, what can we do to help other countries build their own economy, and particularly to help the middle class be more than 20% of the population. If you don't have a strong, vibrant, dominant middle class, you're going to have, if most of the folks are residing in the impoverished group, you're going to have the propensity to export folks. And so I think it is our challenge, as Dr. Matriano is suggesting, not just to think about this from the lenses of the United States and what's best for our country, but also to think about it from how do we help it be more attractive. And yeah, you got a great idea. Why don't we go over and help out some of the countries that are less privileged than us?
Okay. I have been one of those people that have gone over and spent 5 years in China teaching, and I found that they were more accepting of Americans coming there to help them than we are sometimes of the way we deal with each other here. But my question was, in this DREAM Act, is this just free education? Are they student loans? I mean, at what point are they paying back what's been given to them outside of getting a job? Whereas you have American students who are in those under the poverty level who can go to school but have to pay back that money.
Right.
It's not free education, it's just one provision of the DREAM Act allows states to charge resident students the same in-state tuition, so regardless of their documentation status. So for example, if you live in California, we don't care what your immigration status is, you pay the same tuition as other residents of California. So it's not at all free education or loans or anything. It's just equality of treatment.
But I mean, even paying that back, how are they paying that back? Through just strictly working, or are there...
They have to
pay tuition.
They have to pay tuition.
It's simply a path to residency for people who grew up in the country. Say you came over when you were 3 because your parents brought you over. Once you hit 18, you're not allowed to go to college because you don't have status. It's giving you the chance to obtain status if in return that you would go to college and finish a degree. And you would go through the same steps. You would enroll, pay your tuition, take out loans, just like a student, another student.
I think Noel wants to add to that.
Sorry, I don't think you have to pay for your own school. The DREAM Act passes, you have to pay for your own school. And after 2 years, you are able to get a permit to work, and then you work to get your residence card. But you don't get any money. You have to pay it out of your own pocket. And the DREAM Act too, it will make not only if you go to school, but if you join the military. So if you join the military or the school, you get education or military for 2 years, you will start the process to get your residence card.
The DREAM Act doesn't pay them to us.
No, it doesn't give you no money, anything.
Financial aid until you have permanent residence.
Yeah.
I actually had to go through that when I started my education. I did not have.
I think maybe there's some confusion about the Supreme Court case that I mentioned, which is about grade school education. So free public education for all grade school students, regardless of their immigration status. Currently public education is free for
for all students qualified for the federal loans, student loans, right?
No.
Not until you're
legal resident.
Okay, so we have two more questions, and I know you've been. I didn't see. I'm sorry, you out of.
You're just facing the other way.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
I have been to a fair number of these talks. It's some interest in the issue, and I just noticed, like in a lot of very important social issues, the pro and anti, whoever we want to call the pro and anti panels, tend to talk about entirely different issues. And if we're going to make any progress, I think we have to really do a lot more listening to the other side of the street and what their real issues are, other than racism or any issues that we really would not respect. The most prominent thing here, if you went to one of those debates and those panels, are things like that we've lost 70 hospitals in California because they're closed due to their statements that they don't have enough money to pay for the unreimbursed medical health care that they are mandated by California to pay, and so they have to close rather than because they can't pay the bills. And so that those are real issues that are respectable issues to talk about. Other things around crime rates, around the issues of immunization, issues that are real issues that need to be discussed. So I hope, I don't want to demonize either side of the debate just in terms of making some progress.
But you know what you just did? You gave IMERIT some foundation for their next immigration event. Isn't that makes a lot of sense? I like that, hearing both sides really clearly. That's when you get, to understand the issue from holistically. We had one more.
My question already answered.
Oh, it's already answered. So everybody, okay, no, sure, okay.
Dr. Chung asked me to bring in this book. It's called The Snakehead. Have any of you heard about it? You probably have it. Some of you are on the panel. This is the story of the Golden Venture, which was a boat that came over, not directly from China, but with Chinese immigrants, and also a lot of human trafficking was going on. Anyway, they came and they wrecked themselves in Far Rockaway, New York, which anybody knows what that beach looks like, it's not very hospitable. So as they were taking the boat apart, anyway. So this is the story of what led up to it. And it has a lot to do with gangs in Chinatown and immigration, and it's wonderful.
What's it called? The Snakehead?
The Snakehead.
Okay.
Who's the author?
Who's the author?
Patrick Radden Keats.
Okay. Thank you for that. We have our last comment from ACLU.
I just couldn't help myself.
Okay, go ahead.
Just because, I've lived in San Diego all my life and have worked with immigrant populations all my life. And one of the things I think, maybe one of the realities that we haven't talked about, and maybe the panel can speak to it too, is this idea of comprehensive immigration reform really slashes and burns our border. Basically, we get screwed when we live in a border town because of the enforcement, the National Guard, the things that are traded at the tables of Congress for amnesty. So maybe something to talk about in your future debate as well is thinking as people who live in a border town, whether we like it or not, like Tijuana and San Diego, or one big home, right? Here we are. We need to remember that there's people dying in our deserts, there's National Guard that shoot children across the border, and from both sides. There's violence happening at our border because we can't seem to figure out this issue. So when we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, I think especially us, we have a burden of responsibility to remember that we live in a border town and that our border isn't slashed and burned. We're not traded at the table for the idea of amnesty for people who live here. So that's my propaganda.
I love it. I love it. Any comments from comments from our final comments?
I'll make a comment. But actually, this is the point. The economic impact of some of the measures from the post-9/11 period have been felt in the border area, the San Diego and Tijuana region, and it's talked about also in the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, for example. I attend some of the international community meetings. And yeah, I mean, there are people who are, very conservative business people who are concerned that being in a border area and then having these measures implemented, excuse me, has cost the economy over the last 10 years a tremendous amount of money. And it's something that we're all going to feel because as San Diegans, one feels that, there's less money for public services, and there's less incentive to go across the border, and there's less. There's a feeling of being a little bit less well off as a result of some of the security measures that have been implemented over the last 10 years. So yeah, I see that part of the situation as well. And I think if you live in other border cities on both sides of the border, you feel it as well. For that matter, on the Canadian and American border as well, because of the reduced cross-border traffic and some of the inconveniences that have sprung up in the post-9/11.
Okay, I think it was a very scintillating and provocative event. It wasn't. I want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for investing their time here. And we have our honored guest gets a special treat. We were just going to get paper, but that's okay. So Stephanie, thank you very, very much. Thank you. For important contribution to the IMERIT San Diego Symposium on Immigration, Who's In, Who's Out, and Why It Matters. Thank you very, very much. Okay. David Felsen. Same thing. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. Rodney Lowman. Thank you very, very much. We spoke for this. His certificate got messed up last minute, and I had to. Linna Wang. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Noel. Please, thank you so much. That got messed up, so he's going to get his tomorrow through the face. The face right here. Okay? All right, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for staying. Shake